Welcome to Donald's Studies in Bible Exegesis and Theology. Last time we looked at the Roman emperors during biblical times and I gave you a quick scaffold. And this time I want to just look at one or two of them in a slightly more detail with respect to the Bible itself. Now the first Roman emperor was Caesar Augustus, and he's mentioned in the Bible in Luke chapter 2 at verse 1. Where it says, "It came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed." So he was the first Roman emperor. And in actual fact, we get the month August. Its name comes from him. The month was renamed in honor of Caesar Augustus. So he's mentioned there in Luke chapter 2 at verse 1. And his significance is that he was the Roman emperor when Jesus was born. It's generally conceded that Jesus was born in 4 BC, and we'll come to notice that when we look at our next Roman emperor. The second one was Tiberius Caesar. And he's also mentioned in the Bible, and he's in the very next chapter. So Luke chapter 2 verse 1 and Luke chapter 3 verse 1 have got the names of these first two Roman emperors. And it's worth noting that the changeover year is reckoned to be AD 14, because that's the year when Caesar Augustus died, and therefore Tiberius Caesar became the Caesar in his place. And I'm just mentioning that date because we'll come to it in a moment. Another little factoid about 14 is that is the narrowest point in the land of Israel. It's only 14 kilometers wide. And I mention that just to draw attention to how small the land of Israel actually is. And although it's surrounded by millions of square miles of Arab countries, Iran and some others have said that they want to wipe Israel off the face of the map. The reason for that is that they consider the land of Israel to be holy land, Islamic land, which they cannot concede to anyone else. So that the two-state solution will never really be implemented by them, because they don't consider the land to be anything else than their holy land. So at its narrowest point is only 14 kilometers, and at that 14 AD is a changeover between the two Caesars. So we noted Luke chapter 2 verse 1 where it says there, "That came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed." And you'll remember that Mary and Joseph went from Nazareth and they went to Bethlehem for this taxing, and therefore Jesus was born in Bethlehem as a direct result of this matter. So if you then switch over to chapter 3, verse 1, it says, "In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea," there's a name you'll know, "and Herod being tetrarch of Galilee, and his brother Philip tetrarch of Iturea and of the region of Trachonitis, and Lysanias the tetrarch of Abilene." Because after Herod the Great died, just at the time of Jesus' birth, in 4 BC, these four different tetrarchs, tetrarch refers to four, were governors here. And you'll notice that we've not just got Tiberius Caesar, but you've got Pontius Pilate, and you've got Herod being tetrarch of Galilee. This is the son of Herod the Great, and he, because he was up in Galilee, he founded a city on the Sea of Galilee on the west side, and he called it Tiberias, after Tiberius Caesar. So he named it after the Caesar, and Tiberias is now a very old city, therefore it's as old as the 2 millennia, and I remember being in it in the year 2000 when I led a party to Israel. So that's the first two Caesars. Now there's another interesting point about this where it says here about in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. If you then go down to verse 29 of Luke chapter 3, putting those two verses together led to a mistake with regard to the birth of Jesus. And it goes something like this. Did I say verse 29? I meant verse 23. Let me just read it for you. And Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age. You see, there's Jesus' age, 30, in verse 23. And at verse 1, we've got here Tiberius Caesar. Now what happened is that the dates were according to the Roman emperors, etc. You find that in the Old Testament as well, according to the kings. And the person who came up with the idea of the AD and the BC dates, that's as before Christ and after Christ, Anno Domini, the after Christ, he calculated it based upon Luke chapter 3 verse 1 and verse 23. And so he got back to the year 0, that's when Jesus was born. But what he hadn't realized, and took some time for people to realize, is that Tiberius Caesar had a slight overlap of his reign with Caesar Augustus, so that you had this little bit of overlap. And that's where the 4 BC comes in, is because of that mistake that was made in calculating things. And I just mention that so that you're aware that where the 4 BC comes from. This is the general consensus at the moment, although there are different people who have different views on that particular matter. So we've had Caesar Augustus when Jesus was born, who gave his name to the month of Augustus. He hands over, when he dies, to Tiberius Caesar, who was the Caesar who was the emperor during the adult life of Jesus, and indeed during Jesus' crucifixion, although it's Pontius Pilate that comes to the fore during the crucifixion of Jesus. Herod Antipas, one of the tetrarchs, he built the city Tiberias, which we read about in the Bible, on the Sea of Galilee, and these verses contribute to the mistake with regard to the AD and BC and Jesus being born therefore in 4 BC. Now, saying we're on numbers, and I did mention in one of the previous videos how Jesus being born in 4 BC, and Archbishop Usher calculated the creation of the world at 4004 BC, and therefore that makes the Old Testament cover a 4,000 year period, and it's worth just having these figures in your head. Now, although modern man likes to mock these dates because of their evolutionary theories, it's worth noticing that there is actually no history. There's no tangible history before 4000 BC. Now, before the age of the internet, you used to buy these books, big atlases and encyclopedias, and even Encyclopedia Britannica has now been put out of the way because of the internet. But I remember buying this book all those years ago. You see, I have a big fat book, and it's called History. It's got the timetables of history, a horizontal linkage of people and events, and you would open it, and at this column of all the different things that were going on at different years, and different columns, the columns, things like history and politics, literature, philosophy and religion, visual arts, science, etc. So of course I was very interested in seeing, well, what did it actually begin with? So let me turn you to the front page. Here's the first front page. You can pause the video just to look at that a wee bit more accurately. And I'll read out to you what it says under 5000 to 4000 BC. That is before. This is what it says. First, exactly dated year in history is 4241 BC. Not very far different from 4004, but you're meant to laugh at 4004, but you're not allowed to laugh at 4241. But that is what it says. There it is. You can pause the video and read it. So the facts are we have no real written history before this time, and the historical narrative begins at that time. So you've got this 4,000 years covering Old Testament history. And I've got written down here what Wikipedia says, our modern source of all knowledge. And I don't really mean that in a mocking sense. It is very useful. I've always agreed with the concept. It says about the 5th millennium BC, that is before 4000 BC. It says this: the 5th millennium BC, it is impossible to precisely date events that happened around the time of this millennium. And all dates mentioned here are estimates, mostly based on geological and anthropological analysis. I'll just reread, it is impossible. Now you can go into Wikipedia and read it for yourself. So what does it say about the 4th millennium? That is where the Bible starts. This is what it says. The 4th millennium BC spans the years 4000 through 3000 BC. Some of the major changes in human culture during this time included the beginning of the Bronze Age and the invention of writing, which played a major role in starting recorded history. Our Bible begins at the beginning of recorded history. I'll have mentioned the opportunity if the Lord spares us to deal with history and the father of history in due course. I think I might have mentioned it just in passing. The book of Genesis now. There are 66 books in the Bible. Remember 39, 3 times 9 in the Old Testament, and 39, 3, 9, and then 3 times 9 is 27 in the New Testament. 66 books in the Bible. 4,000 years. The 39 books of the Old Testament cover 4,000 years. More than half of that is in the first book, in the book of Genesis. If you remember, before you get to Genesis chapter 5, Methuselah had already lived 969 years. He was the oldest man recorded in the Bible. That's almost 1,000 years. That's before you get to the end of Genesis 5, where you start reading about the flood, the global flood, and Methuselah died just before the global flood, which is in Genesis chapter 8. And he died, if you count it from the beginning of what the Bible says, died 1656 years after the beginning of Genesis. Now Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, that we're all familiar with in the book of Genesis, or should I say those who read the Bible are familiar with it. Now everyone is. Now they're around about 2000. So, you're halfway through the book of Genesis and you're already at the 2,000 years have passed. And by the time you get to the end of the book of Genesis in chapter 50, where Joseph dies, you're up to 2369. That's 369. 369. 969. 2369 for those of you who like to remember your numbers. So that's the sort of time period we're talking about in the book of Genesis. And it's just worth remembering that the first 5 books of the Bible, which are called the Law of Moses or the Law of the Torah, which is the Hebrew word, it gives a promise that a prophet like unto Moses will be raised up. And it took thousands of years for that promise to be fulfilled. Which is just a reminder of what Peter tells us in his epistle about those who say, where is the promise of his coming? Because all things are continuing as they've always done, which of course is your evolutionary theory. So that the Lord's promises, he makes a promise and he will fulfill it in his own time. But it might be 1,000 years. So we looked at the outline of the Caesars last time, and my time is running on. So I'll just mention or just remind you about Claudius, who was not the next emperor but one of the emperors, and he's mentioned in the Acts of the Apostles when there was a famine in the days of Claudius, the Roman emperor, and he expelled the Jews from Rome, which delayed Paul being able to visit the Rome. Then we mentioned Nero, the Emperor Nero, on the last occasion, just mentioned that. We won't go into that in any detail, but I think I did a bit more on that last time. Nero is the one. When we talk of Caesar Augustus, it's quite interesting when you're reading through the Acts of the Apostles at the end that they talk about Paul appealing to Caesar and saying one of the phrases is that he's appealed to Augustus because the name Augustus was adopted by following emperors. And when it says Augustus there, it does not mean Augustus Caesar at the time of Jesus' birth. It's the name for the current Caesar, and the current Caesar at that time was Nero, the one who is sort of reputed to have fiddled when Rome burned, and under whose hand the Apostle Paul was eventually put to death. But maybe we've said enough for this occasion. We've concentrated a bit on the first two Caesars, who's, remember, Luke chapter 2 verse 1, Luke chapter 3 verse 1 has got a couple of names there, which hopefully you can put them into perspective. And we skimmed over just the thousands of years. We had almost 2,500 years in the first book, in the book of Genesis, and then the whole of the Old Testament covers a 4,000 year period, and we are now moving on into into the seventh millennium, which some people want to think means the end of the world, but that's not the case. We might have occasion to mention that in future occasions if the Lord spares us. So until the next time, take care, and may the Lord bless you and keep you. It was a lovely sunny day today, and last week I had some cherries from our cherry tree, and this week my daughter and my little granddaughter were picking some raspberries, and so you'll forgive me if I indulge myself with a few raspberries to make you feel slightly jealous.